Dad, we don't need you on this trip anymore. We've invited investors instead. I froze. A celebration of life had just turned into a business deal, and I was discarded like a liability. I sat in silence, suitcase packed, staring at the garish Hawaiian shirt that now mocked me. But when I opened the trust account, I saw the truth. Designer clothes, spa days, a Porsche deposit. They betrayed me. They stole from me. They thought I'd stay quiet. But with one call, I took everything back. Their empire collapsed overnight. Now they've lost it all, and I won't be answering their calls. Thank you for choosing to spend your time with us today. If you appreciate stories that explore life's toughest lessons, please subscribe to hear more. We also love hearing where our stories are being enjoyed, so feel free to let us know in the comments where you're listening from. Now let's get back to Arthur's story. Before the Porsche, before the lawyers and the for sale sign, my life was a balanced ledger. For 45 years as a certified public accountant, my world revolved around order logic and the comforting certainty of numbers that added up. My home in Scottsdale, Arizona reflected that precision. The gravel in the driveway was perfectly raked. The cacti in my garden stood in neat rows, and the hum of the air conditioner was the only sound that broke the dry desert silence. I had built a life on the principle that every risk should be calculated, every asset protected. There was only one entry on my life's balance sheet that I considered an irrational emotional investment, my daughter Brenda. When she and her husband Kyle came to me with their grand vision for a high-end restaurant, the CPA in me saw red flags everywhere. Their business plan was more sizzle than steak full of buzzwords and projections that relied more on hope than on market data. But the father in me saw the light in Brenda's eyes. So I did what any father with the means would do. I found a way to support her dream while mitigating the risk. I established a $1 million business trust. It wasn't a gift. It was a structured investment. I was the sole trustee with the power to oversee the accounts and release funds based on verifiable progress. The beautiful ranch-style house they lived in was the trust's primary asset. It was my way of providing a safety net, a foundation built of logic for their dream built of passion. The plan was working, or so I thought. The seed money was being used for permits, architectural plans, and vendor deposits. Meanwhile, I was planning something of my own. A recent health scare had ended with a clean bill of health, and I wanted to celebrate. A 10-day cruise to Hawaii, a trip I'd dreamed of for years. I invited Brenda and Kyle to join me, all expenses paid. It was meant to be a celebration of life, of family, of a future that looked as bright and promising as a Hawaiian sunrise. I was in my home office, tracing the road to Hana on a glossy map of Maui with my index finger. The scent of fresh ink and paper filled the air, a welcome change from the sterile smell of the doctor's office that had been my reality for months. My suitcase sat open by the door, a brand new floral Hawaiian shirt folded neatly on top. It was a loud, garish thing, not my usual style, but it felt like a statement, a declaration of life. For the first time in a long time, the future wasn't a liability to be managed, but an asset to be enjoyed. That's when my phone buzzed on the polished surface of my desk. Brenda's name flashed on the screen, accompanied by a picture of her smiling at her wedding. I smiled, too, picking up the phone. "Hey, sweetie." Getting excited. "Did you remember to pack the high SPF sunscreen?" "Hey, Dad," she said, her voice bright but distant, the kind of professional cheerfulness she used with clients. "Listen, quick update on the Hawaii trip. Everything okay?" I asked. A small, unfounded flicker of concern passing through me. "The flights are all confirmed. I checked this morning." There was a slight pause. I could hear the faint murmur of Kyle's voice in the background. "Well, that's the thing," Brenda began, her tone shifting into something more strategic. "Kyle and I were talking, and this trip has turned into a huge networking opportunity. There are a couple of potential investors for the restaurant on this exact cruise. It's an incredible coincidence." "Oh," I said, my finger stopping on the map. "Well, that's wonderful news." "It is," she agreed quickly. "And Kyle's parents, you know, his dad is in commercial real estate. They have connections with these people. So for the sake of the business, we've decided to invite them to come with us instead. It just makes more sense, you know, for synergy." The word hung in the air. Synergy. The map in front of me seemed a blur. My meticulously planned celebration of life had just been rebranded as a business expense. Instead, I finally managed to say the single word, feeling like a stone in my throat. "Yeah, it would be awkward with 5 of us. This is purely a business play now, Dad. You understand numbers. It's about maximizing the return on investment." Her voice was devoid of any emotion, as if she were closing a deal. "We'll do something to celebrate your health when we get back. We'll have a nice dinner." My treat. I couldn't form a response. The silence stretched, filled only by the low hum of my computer. "Dad, you there?" "I'm here," I said, my own voice sounding foreign to me. "Great. Well, I have to run. Talk soon." The line went dead. I slowly lowered the phone, placing it back on the desk with deliberate care, as if it might shatter. I looked from the phone to the open suitcase, to the ridiculous, colorful shirt that now seemed to be mocking me. The quiet, orderly world I had built for myself suddenly felt vast, empty, and very, very cold. My mind, trained for decades to find patterns and discrepancies, started to whirl. It wasn't just hurt I felt, it was something else. It was the unnerving feeling of an equation that didn't add up. I sat in my leather office chair, the silence of the house pressing in on me. The hurt was still there, a dull ache in my chest, but another feeling was beginning to surface, the familiar instinctual urge of the accountant. When emotions were chaotic, I found order in numbers. It was a habit forged over a lifetime of untangling complex financial messes for other people. Now, it seemed I had to do it for myself. My fingers moved across the keyboard, with muscle memory, navigating to the online portal for the business trust. The screen loaded, displaying the account dashboard. Balance $874, 321.15. A significant amount had been spent, but it was within the expected range for the initial phase of opening a restaurant. I took a slow breath and opened the transaction history for the last 90 days. My professional mask slipped into place. I wasn't a father looking at his daughter's spending. I was a trustee auditing an account. The first dozen entries were exactly what I expected. Payments to the city for permits, a wire transferred to a commercial kitchen supplier, a check to an architectural firm. Everything was categorized, annotated, and seemingly in order. A small part of me began to relax. Maybe I was overreacting. Maybe the pain of her words had made me paranoid. Then I saw it. A charge for $3.400 at a high-end boutique in Scottsdale Fashion Square. The memo line read "Staff Uniform Prototypes." I stared at the name of the store. They sold Italian silk scarves and designer handbags, not chef's coats and aprons. I felt a cold prickle on the back of my neck. I told myself there could be a logical explanation. Maybe it was for a promotional event. I kept scrolling. The discrepancies began to pile up, each one a small crack in the foundation of my trust. A $1.200 charge at a day spa categorized as employee wellness and morale. A series of dinners at Mastro's Steakhouse, 5 in total, each over $800. The memo for each one was identical: investor outreach dinner. No names, no specifics. It was sloppy. My daughter, who had grown up watching me work, knew the importance of meticulous record-keeping. This wasn't just careless. It felt intentional, contemptuous. My professionalism was evaporating, replaced by a cold, sinking dread. I was no longer auditing an account. I was documenting a betrayal. The numbers on the screen were no longer just figures. They were evidence of 1,000 tiny lies, each one paid for by my life savings. The rational part of my brain, the CPA, was taking notes, calculating the total of the fraudulent charges. But the father, the man who had held his daughter's hand on her first day of school, just felt his heart breaking transaction by transaction. The ledger didn't lie, and this one was telling me a story I never wanted to read. I kept scrolling my hand, gripping the mouse so tightly my knuckles turned white. The small lies were painful enough, but my auditor's instinct told me they were just a smokescreen. People who steal a little often hide a lot. I scanned the list, my eyes searching for the one transaction that would explain the rest, the anchor of the entire deception. And then I found it. It wasn't buried or cleverly disguised. It was hiding in plain sight, a wire transfer for $50,000. The amount was a round, arrogant number. The recipient was listed simply as Phoenix Automotive Imports. The memo was almost laughable in its vagueness. Initial fleet vehicle deposit. A fleet. For a restaurant that hadn't even broken ground. The coldness that had been prickling at my neck now spread through my entire body, an icy certainty. I opened a new browser tab. My fingers typed the name of the company with stiff, precise movements. The search results loaded instantly. The top result was not a supplier of delivery vans or catering trucks. It was the homepage for the premier Porsche dealership in the Phoenix metropolitan area. Their tagline shimmered in elegant script across a picture of a gleaming silver 911, engineered for magic. And for you. I leaned back in my chair, the leather creaking in the silent room. $50,000. The exact down payment needed for the model Kyle had pointed out to me in a magazine months ago, laughing it off as a someday dream. It all clicked into place with the sickening finality of a lock engaging. The fancy dinners, the designer clothes, the spa days, they weren't isolated instances of poor judgment. They were a lifestyle funded by a systematic plundering of the trust I had established. They weren't building a restaurant. They were building a fantasy, and I was the unwitting financier. The hurt I'd felt earlier was burned away, replaced by the cold, clear fire of pure rage. I had been played for a fool. As if summoned by my thoughts, my computer screen chimed with a notification. A small window popped up in the corner. Brenda had posted a new photo on Facebook. I clicked on it. There they were, Brenda and Kyle, standing on the deck of a cruise ship, cocktails in hand, the Hawaiian sunset painting the sky behind them. They were both grinning, radiating success. Brenda's caption was a final, brutal twist of the knife. It read, "Living our best life and making big moves. So grateful for a family that supports our vision. Number boss moves, number entrepreneur life." I stared at the photo, at their carefree smiles, at the hashtags celebrating their deceit. The word family felt like a physical blow. That was it. The final entry in a ledger full of red ink. I closed the laptop. The click was sharp and final in the quiet of my office. The debate in my mind was over. The father had left the room. The trustee remained. My thumb hovered over Frank's name in my contacts. Frank wasn't just my lawyer for the past 30 years. He was one of the few men I called a true friend. We'd seen each other through business deals, the loss of our spouses, and countless rounds of golf. He knew my finances as well as I did, and he was the one who had drafted the trust document. It was past 10 o'clock at night, but I knew he'd answer. I pressed the call button. He picked up on the second ring, his voice raspy with sleep but instantly alert. "Arthur, everything all right, Frank? I apologize for the late hour." I began my tone as level as if I were discussing a quarterly tax filing. "I need your professional counsel. I've been auditing the BLM Trust." I used the official name of the fund, the Brenda and Kyle Marshall Trust. There was a pause. At this hour, Frank asked, the sleepiness gone from his voice. "What did you find?" I spent the next 10 minutes laying it out for him. I didn't speak of betrayal or my broken heart. I spoke of discrepancies, of unauthorized expenditures, of non-compliant memo lines, and a clear pattern of misappropriation. I listed the boutiques, the steakhouses, and finally the $50,000 wire transfer to a Porsche dealership. I read Brenda's Facebook post to him verbatim. I presented the facts as if I were a witness on the stand testifying about a stranger. When I finished, the line was silent for a long moment. I could picture him in his study rubbing his temples. "Okay," he finally said, his voice low and serious. "The legal term for this is gross misuse of funds and a breach of fiduciary duty. It's fraud, Arthur, plain and simple." "I'm aware of the terminology, Frank," I replied calmly. "What I need to confirm is my position as sole trustee. The language we drafted, it's ironclad, correct?" "Ironclad doesn't even begin to describe it," he confirmed. "You have absolute authority. You can freeze the account, you can initiate clawbacks, and you can dissolve the trust entirely. If you dissolve it, all assets, including the house, revert to your sole ownership. They would have 30 days to vacate the property." He let that sink in. He was making sure I understood the gravity of the decision, the finality of it. "The question here, Arthur, isn't what you can do," Frank continued, his voice softening slightly, shifting from lawyer to friend. "You and I both know you can burn it all to the ground legally. The question is what you want to do." I looked out my office window at the dark, silent desert. The question echoed in the quiet room. What did I want? The answer was surprisingly clear. I wanted order. I wanted the books to be balanced. I wanted a lifetime of careful planning and hard work to mean something more than a down payment on a sports car. "I want to liquidate," I said, the word tasting like cold steel. "Everything." I didn't sleep, but I didn't feel tired. I watched the Arizona sun rise, painting the desert sky in shades of orange and pink, but I felt none of its warmth. The emotional storm of the previous night had passed, leaving behind a cold, clear calm. There was no more anguish, no more debate. There was only a column of tasks on a mental ledger waiting to be executed. I made coffee, the familiar ritual grounding me. At precisely 8:00 a.m., my computer chimed. An email from Frank. The subject line was simply, "Documents ready." Attached were several password-protected PDF files. I didn't open them yet. There was one more thing I needed to do first. I walked to the large oak filing cabinet in the corner of my office. From a locked drawer, I retrieved a heavy leather-bound portfolio. Embossed in gold lettering on the front were the words, "The BLM Trust." I carried it back to my desk and laid it under the lamplight, the leather cool beneath my fingertips. I remembered the day I'd had it made. Brenda had been so excited, her eyes shining as she talked about her future. I had seen this binder as the foundation of that future. Now it was a tombstone. I opened it. The pages were crisp, the text dense and black. My eyes skipped past the legal jargon, landing on Section 4, Subsection B, misuse of funds. It was a clause I had insisted on, one that Frank had called pessimistically thorough. It clearly defined what constituted a breach: any expenditure not directly related to the stated business purpose of the trust. It outlined the consequences with surgical precision: immediate freezing of assets, and the trustee's right to dissolve the entity without contest. I ran my finger along the lines of text. I had written these rules to protect my daughter from outside risks, from bad partners or a volatile market. I never imagined I would be using them to protect my legacy from her. Every asset has a liability. I had taught her that financial principle when she was a teenager. It seemed she had forgotten the lesson. She saw the trust as an asset to be spent, but she failed to see the liability attached to it: me, the trustee, the man who wrote the rules. I closed the portfolio. The soft thud echoed in the quiet room. The decision was no longer just an emotional reaction to a deep wound. It was a contractual obligation. It was the enforcement of terms that had been clearly stated and willingly agreed upon. Everything has rules, even an ending, and this one would be conducted by the book. With the leather portfolio closed on my desk, I turned back to my computer. I opened Frank's email, entered the password, and the documents appeared on my screen. The language was cold, formal, and final. Notice of breach of trust. Letter of dissolution. Asset reversion order. Each document was a nail in the coffin of my daughter's fabricated life. I spent the next hour reviewing every line, not with the eyes of a grieving father, but with the meticulous focus of a CPA, ensuring every detail was correct before a final audit. Everything was perfect. I attached my digital signature, the modern equivalent of a pen stroke, and sent the signed copies back to Frank. An automated reply confirmed he had received them. The first domino had been pushed. My next call was to the bank that held the trust's accounts. I spoke to the branch manager, a man I had known for years. "Michael, it's Arthur Finch," I said, my voice steady. "I am exercising my full authority as trustee to dissolve the BLM trust, effective immediately, due to a material breach. I've had my lawyer forward you the official documentation." There was a moment of surprised silence on the other end. "Arthur, of course. I'll look for the email from Frank. What are your instructions for the remaining funds?" "Transfer the entire balance to my personal account," I instructed, "and freeze all associated credit and debit cards. I want the account balance set to 0. "Understood," Michael said, his tone professional, asking no personal questions. "It will be done within the hour." I hung up. No hesitation, no regret. It was a business decision. The trust had become a non-performing asset riddled with fraud. The only logical course of action was to liquidate. My final call of the morning was to the top real estate agent in Scottsdale, a woman named Sharon, who was known for her efficiency and discretion. "Sharon Arthur Finch," I said when she answered. "I have a property I need to list. Immediately." "Arthur, good to hear from you," she replied, her voice warm, but all business. "Which property are we talking about?" I gave her the address of Brenda and Kyle's house. "Oh, your daughter's lovely home," she said, a hint of confusion in her tone. "Are they moving?" "The ownership structure has changed," I said, sidestepping the question. "The property is now under my sole ownership, and I want to sell it. Price it to move. I want it sold before the end of the month. In this market, that's more than possible," she said, her professional instincts taking over. "I can have the listing agreement sent over this afternoon and a for sale sign on the lawn by tomorrow morning if you'd like." "Tomorrow will be too late," I said, glancing at the calendar on my desk. They were due back from Hawaii on Saturday afternoon. Today was Thursday. "I want the sign on the lawn Saturday morning, as early as possible." After the calls, a profound silence settled over the house. It was a different kind of quiet from the gentle peace of my retirement. This silence had sharp edges. It was the sound of doors being locked and bridges being burned. I didn't move from my desk for what felt like hours, listening to the hum of the refrigerator from the kitchen, a sound I normally never noticed. I was a man adrift in his own home, waiting for the consequences he had set in motion to reach the shore. There was no turmoil inside me, no last-minute wave of guilt. The numbers had told a story, and I had simply written the final chapter. In the early afternoon, the chime of a new email cut through the stillness. It was from Sharon, the real estate agent. The subject line was concise: "Listing agreement for your signature." I opened it. The familiar blue and white interface of the DocuSign program loaded a sterile digital portal for a deeply personal act. I scrolled through the contract. The list price, she suggested, was aggressive, reflecting the hot Scottsdale market. I saw the property description she had written, a perfect family home meticulously cared for, ready for new memories. The irony was a bitter pill. This house was indeed ready for new memories, because the old ones were now being liquidated. My eyes scanned the standard clauses and commission rates until I reached the final page. A small, bright yellow box pulsed gently beckoning. Sign here. My hand was steady on the mouse as I moved the cursor over it, but I paused just before clicking. In that sliver of a second, the ghost of the father I had been for 40 years materialized beside me. A memory flashed unbidden and sharp. Brenda, age 6, learning to ride her bike on the very lawn where the for sale sign would soon stand. I could almost feel the phantom weight of her small hand in mine, hear her squeal of delight as she finally found her balance. Then, just as quickly, the memory was bulldozed by another image, the gleaming silver of a Porsche 911 on a dealership's website. I heard Brenda's voice in my head, not the child's squeal, but the cool, dismissive tone of a strategist. It just makes more sense, for synergy. I thought of the hashtag number boss moves. The ghost of the father vanished, taking the warmth with it. I was Arthur Finch, the trustee, and the books had to be balanced. I clicked the mouse. My name appeared in a clean cursive script that felt like a stranger's. Arthur Finch. No hesitation. I clicked the Finish button. A confirmation screen appeared. Your document has been successfully signed and sent. It was done. No ink stained my fingers. No heavy parchment to fold. A life-altering decision executed with a single weightless click in a silent room. I finally pushed back from the desk, my joints protesting. I walked to the kitchen and poured a glass of cold water, watching my own reflection in the dark kitchen window. The man staring back looked older, his face a mask of calm resolve. On the refrigerator, the novelty calendar from the local bank hung crookedly. Thursday was now in the past. Friday was a blank space, a day of waiting. And then Saturday, circled in red for my canceled flight, now loomed with a different, heavier meaning. The day they would come home. Friday was a day of profound and deliberate normalcy. I woke at my usual time, 6:30, just as the sun began to cast long shadows across the desert floor. I went through my morning routine with the same precision I had for the past 5 years of my retirement. I made coffee, read the financial section of the Wall Street Journal on my tablet, and watered the cacti in my garden. Each action was a small anchor holding me steady in the quiet currents of the day. There were no more phone calls to make, no more documents to sign. The machinery of my plan was in motion, operating independently of me now. All that was left was to wait for the final accounts to be settled. A strange sense of detachment washed over me. It felt as if I were watching a movie of my own life, knowing how the next scene would unfold, but powerless to change it because the script had already been written. I spent the afternoon cleaning out my garage, a task I had been putting off for months. I sorted old tools, dusted off forgotten pieces of furniture, and packed away boxes of my late wife's belongings that I hadn't had the heart to touch until now. There was no sadness in the task, only a sense of putting things in their proper place. I found a box of Brenda's old school projects and report cards. I saw the gold stars her teachers had given her for good behavior, the childish handwriting on a Mother's Day card she had made. I felt a flicker of something not regret, but a deep, sorrowful acknowledgement of the immense distance between the little girl who had made that card and the woman who was currently flying home from Hawaii. I closed the box and labeled it Childhood. I placed it neatly on a high shelf, a piece of history filed away. As evening approached, I sat on my back patio watching the sky bleed into shades of purple and orange. My neighbors were having a barbecue. The scent of grilled meat and the sound of laughter drifted over the wall. It was the sound of a normal Friday night in a normal suburban neighborhood. Inside my house, my phone was silent. I had received no panicked calls, no angry texts. The bank transfer had been completed, the credit cards frozen, but they wouldn't know until they tried to use them. Perhaps they were still in the air, blissfully unaware, suspended between their tropical paradise and the harsh reality waiting for them on the ground. The calm before the storm. And I, the architect of that storm, sat quietly waiting for it to make landfall. Saturday morning arrived with the same indifferent sunshine as the day before. But today the air felt different. It was charged with anticipation. I could almost picture them 6 hours behind in Hawaii, checking out of their 5-star hotel. I imagined the scene with the clarity of a motion picture. Kyle, ever the big shot, would be at the front desk sliding the corporate card from the trust across the marble counter to settle the incidentals. The overpriced Mai Tais, the couple's massage, the room service breakfasts, and then the first quiet note of disaster. I could see the polite practice smile of the hotel clerk falter slightly. "I'm sorry, sir," she would say, her voice low. "This card has been declined." Kyle would laugh it off, a flush creeping up his neck. "Impossible." "Run it again." She would. The result would be the same. I pictured Brenda stepping forward, her own smile tight, forcing a casual air. "Don't be ridiculous, Kyle. Just use another card." He would try his personal card, then she would try hers. Declined. Declined. The small humiliations would pile up one after another under the patient gaze of the people waiting in line behind them. Panic would set in on the ride to the airport. I imagined their conversation no longer the confident chatter of number boss moves, but the frantic whispered accusations of cornered animals. "What the hell is going on, Kyle?" Brenda would hiss, scrolling furiously through her banking app on her phone. "Everything is frozen. How should I know?" He'd snap back. "This is your father's trust. Maybe he forgot to pay a bill. He's getting old, you know." The excuse would sound hollow even to them. An accountant like me never forgot to pay a bill. They would spend the entire flight trying to connect to the spotty in-flight Wi-Fi, their desperation growing with each failed attempt to load a web page. They would try calling me their messages, going straight to my voicemail, which I had intentionally let fill up. They would text a barrage of question marks and exclamation points that would go unanswered. 6 hours in a pressurized cabin, 30,000 feet in the air, with no escape and no answers. The empire they had built on my money was crumbling beneath them, and they couldn't even get a signal. I pictured them landing at Phoenix Sky Harbor, the familiar heat hitting them as they stepped off the plane, but for the first time it would offer no comfort. It would only feel like the prelude to a different kind of fire. Their paradise was over. Now they were coming home to the consequences. I arrived 10 minutes before them, parking my sedan across the street, and 2 houses down, partially concealed by the shade of a large Palo Verde tree. I had a clear view of the house. Their house, or rather the house that used to be theirs. It looked the same as always, the lawn perfectly manicured, the desert landscaping immaculate. Except for one new addition, there staked firmly in the center of the green grass was a large, bright red sign. In bold white letters it announced "For sale." Beneath it in smaller print was Sharon's name and number. It was a beautiful, terrible sight. I didn't have to wait long. A taxi turned onto the street, its engine whining as it pulled up to the curb. Brenda and Kyle emerged, looking tired, angry, and rumpled from their long flight. They pulled their designer luggage onto the sidewalk, their movements sharp and irritated. For a moment they didn't see it. Their attention was on paying the driver on the mundane task of returning home. Then Brenda looked up. I saw her body go rigid. Her hand reaching for her purse froze midair. Her mouth opened slightly. She nudged Kyle, her finger jabbing towards the lawn. He turned, and his reaction was less subtle. His jaw dropped, and the carry-on bag he was holding slipped from his grasp, thudding onto the concrete. They both just stood there, paralyzed, staring at the sign as if it were an apparition. A car pulled into the driveway, Sharon, the real estate agent, right on schedule. She got out, a professional smile on her face, holding a clipboard. "Can I help you?" she asked brightly, clearly assuming they were curious passers-by. "Help us," Kyle finally found his voice, and it was rough with disbelief and rage. "What the hell is this? Who are you? This is our house." Sharon's smile didn't falter, but her eyes grew cautious. "I'm afraid there must be some misunderstanding. This property was listed for sale this morning by the owner, Mr. Arthur Finch." My father, Brenda's voice was a squeak. No, that's impossible. There's been a mistake. He would never." Her voice trailed off as the implications began to crash down around her. "There's no mistake," a calm voice said. My voice. I had gotten out of my car and was walking slowly towards them across the quiet suburban street. The sun was hot on my shoulders, but I felt nothing. All 3 of them turned to look at me, their faces a mixture of confusion, dawning horror, and in Sharon's case, professional relief. I stopped on the sidewalk a respectable distance away, letting the weight of my presence fill the space between us. I was no longer an unseen force. I was here. The final audit was about to begin. Dad, Brenda's voice was a strained whisper, the bravado she wore like a second skin finally cracking. "What did you do?" "I balanced the books, Brenda," I replied, my voice even and calm, carrying easily in the quiet afternoon air. "Something I should have done a long time ago." Kyle stepped forward, his face red and blotchy with anger. He tried to project intimidation, puffing out his chest. "What the hell is he talking about? You can't just sell our house, Arthur. We'll sue you for everything you've got." "On what grounds, Kyle?" I asked, meeting his furious gaze without flinching. "And more importantly, with what money?" The trust you've been using as your personal piggy bank has been dissolved. Its accounts are empty. The color drained from Kyle's face. Brenda stared at me, her eyes wide with a mixture of disbelief and dawning comprehension. Dissolved. What are you talking about? The restaurant? Ah, yes. The restaurant, I said, allowing a thin, cold smile to touch my lips. The one you've been funding with $50,000 down payments on German sports cars. Or perhaps you mean the one whose staff uniform prototypes consist of Italian silk scarves. I've seen the statements, Brenda. All of them. Brenda recoiled as if I had slapped her. She looked from my unyielding face to Kyle's guilty silence, and the final pieces of the puzzle clicked into place for her. Her expression crumpled from confusion into pure, unadulterated fury. You went through our finances? She shrieked, her voice rising. That's an invasion of privacy. It's called an audit, I corrected her gently. It's the duty of a trustee when he suspects fraud. And I didn't have to look very hard. You left a trail of breadcrumbs a mile wide. This is insane, Kyle sputtered, regaining some of his bluster. This house is ours. You gave it to us. I did not. I stated the words sharp and precise. The trust owned this house. You were merely its residents contingent on your adherence to the terms. You broke those terms. Spectacularly. Therefore, the trust's main asset has reverted to me, the trustee, and I am choosing to sell my asset. I looked past them at the house. The home I had poured so much hope into. This isn't your house anymore, I said, my voice dropping but losing none of its steel. As of this morning, it's just a property on the market. Brenda's voice cracked on the last word, her face streaked with tears. It was a tactic she had perfected since childhood, the one weapon in her arsenal that had always worked on me. The sight of her tears had once been enough to make me concede any argument, buy any toy, forgive any transgression. But the man who stood before her now was not the same man who had raised her. The well of unconditional indulgence had finally run dry. I looked at her, my expression unchanging. I saw not my distraught daughter, but the beneficiary of a trust who had willfully broken its covenants. The emotional appeal was inadmissible. It had no place in this final audit. You are my daughter, I acknowledged, my voice quiet but firm, and that is why this is so difficult. But you are also an adult who has made a series of profoundly dishonest choices. Being my daughter does not give you a perpetual license to defraud me. I reached into the inner pocket of my jacket and pulled out a crisp white envelope. My name and address were printed in the corner. Their names were typed neatly in the center. It contained a hard copy of the dissolution notice, and a formal letter stating they had 30 days to vacate the premises. Everything you need to know is in here, I said, holding it out to her. Brenda stared at the envelope as if it were a venomous snake. She wouldn't take it. Kyle, his face a mask of sullen defeat, remained silent. I placed the envelope on top of one of their suitcases on the sidewalk. It rested there, a stark white rectangle against the expensive black luggage. The remaining contents of the house are still technically assets of the now dissolved trust. I continued my tone informational. I will arrange for a moving company to place them in a storage unit. The first month's rent will be paid. After that, they are your responsibility. I had said everything that needed to be said. There were no more accounts to settle, no more arguments to be won. I turned my back on them, on their luggage, on the house, on the entire mess they had created. This isn't over, Kyle shouted behind me, a final, impotent burst of defiance. I didn't stop. I didn't look back. I just kept walking, my footsteps steady on the pavement. The short walk back to my car on the other side of the street felt like crossing a vast, empty continent. With each step, I could feel the toxic weight of their entitlement and deceit falling away from me. I was walking away from a bad investment. It was painful, yes, but it was also finally a relief. I was closing the books on the most costly liability of my life. The 3 weeks that followed were a masterclass in bureaucratic silence, punctuated by sharp, ugly bursts of legal noise. Just as I had anticipated, a process server, a young man who looked impossibly nervous, arrived at my door one afternoon. He handed me a thick envelope containing the lawsuit. I thanked him, closed the door, and read the document over a cup of tea. The pages were a work of fiction, a desperate narrative, painting me as a manipulative, mentally unstable old man, and them as the innocent victims. They claimed emotional distress, theft of property, and breach of a dozen imagined verbal contracts. It was sloppy, emotional, and legally flimsy. I scanned it not with anger, but with the weary sadness of a teacher reading a failing student's incoherent essay. I forwarded a digital copy to Frank with a simple note. As expected, the sale of the house moved with the swift, impersonal efficiency of a strong market. Sharon brought the young couple, the engineer and the teacher, for a second viewing. I had agreed to be present. I watched from the kitchen as they moved through the rooms, their voices full of hopeful whispers. "This is where the crib could go," the wife said, standing in what had been Kyle's home office. "And the backyard is perfect for a dog." They were seeing not just walls and floors, but a future, their future. They were filling the house with a clean, bright energy that scrubbed away the lingering residue of deceit. At the closing a week later, I signed the stack of papers without ceremony. The title agent slid the keys across the table, and I passed them to the young man. His handshake was firm, his eyes full of gratitude. "Thank you, Mr. Finch," he said. "We'll take good care of it." I knew they would. The lawsuit was an even quicker affair. There was no dramatic courtroom showdown. Frank handled it all through motions and filings. He called me last Tuesday, and I could hear the satisfaction in his voice. "It's over, Arthur." The judge dismissed their case with prejudice. The legal term was a final slamming door, meaning they could never file this claim again. He called their suit frivolous, vexatious, and a transparent attempt to extort a family member. I don't think he'll be sending them a Christmas card. Frank emailed me the court's official ruling. I printed the 8-page document, the paper warm from the printer. I read the judge's sharp, incisive words, which laid bare the truth of the situation with cold legal clarity. The plaintiffs have failed to provide any credible evidence. The trust documents, drafted with commendable foresight by the defendant, are clear and unambiguous. Mr. Finch acted not only within his legal rights, but also fulfilled his fiduciary duty as trustee in the face of demonstrable fraud. I took the court document, the signed closing statement from the house sale, and the final zero balance statement from the dissolved trust. I 3-hole punched each one and placed them in a new manila folder. With a steady hand and a black marker, I wrote a single word on the tab, closed. I slid the folder into the back of my filing cabinet behind old tax returns and appliance warranties. It wasn't a trophy to be displayed, but a final entry in a long closed ledger. There was no joy, no triumphant feeling of victory. There was only the quiet, profound relief of a world set right, of an equation finally solved. The red ink was gone. The books were clean. A month passed. The initial stark relief of finality slowly gave way to a quiet, unfamiliar emptiness. My days, once structured around the drama of the trust, were now blank pages. I had won. I had balanced the books and protected my assets. But as I sat on my patio each morning, coffee in hand, I found myself asking the one question a good accountant dreads: what next? The capital had been secured, but what was its purpose? The money from the house sale and the liquidated trust sat in my bank account, a large, dormant number. It felt inert, pointless. For weeks I had operated with the cold precision of a trustee. Now I was just Arthur Finch again, a retired man with too much time and a fractured family. The victory felt hollow because it was by its nature an act of destruction. I had torn something down, but I hadn't built anything in its place. One morning, while reading the local section of the Arizona Republic, I came across a small article. It was about a beloved local bakery, a family-run place that had been around for 50 years, struggling to get a loan to replace their failing oven. The bank considered them too small, too old-fashioned, not a growth-oriented investment. I read about the owner, a woman my age, who was considering selling to a national coffee chain. Something in that story struck a chord deep within me. Here was a real business. A business with history, with loyal customers, with a tangible product that brought people joy. It wasn't a fantasy built on buzzwords and designer clothes. It was a dream built on flour, sugar, and hard work, and it was about to be extinguished because it lacked the capital to survive. I looked at the number in my bank account on my tablet. I had spent so much of my life accumulating that capital, protecting it, and recently reclaiming it. I had originally earmarked it for a dream that turned out to be a lie, but the money itself wasn't tainted. It was just a tool, and a tool could be used for anything. An idea began to form, not as a flash of inspiration, but as a slow, logical calculation. The problem wasn't a lack of dreams in the world. It was a lack of sound, accessible funding for the right kind of dreams. Brenda and Kyle had the charisma to get funding, but no substance. This baker had substance, but no access to capital. The emptiness I'd been feeling began to recede, replaced by a flicker of purpose. I could do more than just protect my money. I could reinvest it, not in stocks or bonds, but in people. Real people with real businesses right here in my own community. I could create a new trust. Not a family trust built on blind hope, but a community fund built on sound principles. A fund that could help a bakery buy a new oven or a young mechanic open his first garage. I opened a fresh spreadsheet on my computer. For the first time in months, I wasn't looking backward at fraudulent transactions. I was looking forward. I typed a title at the top of the blank sheet, the Finch Community Fund Initial Draft. The ledger was no longer closed. It was open again, ready for a new and hopefully much better set of entries. 3 months passed in a blur of productive activity. My home office, once a place of painful discovery, was now the vibrant headquarters of the Finch Community Fund. The walls were covered in whiteboards filled with business models and eligibility criteria. My desk was littered with applications from local entrepreneurs, a woman who wanted to start a mobile dog grooming service, a young veteran hoping to open a coffee shop. The work was consuming, challenging, and for the first time in years, deeply fulfilling. The ghost of the BLM Trust was fading, replaced by the solid, hopeful architecture of this new venture. I was finally building something again, not just balancing the accounts of what others had built or destroyed. The large dormant number in my bank account was being put to work, allocated into seed grants and low-interest loans. Each approved application felt like a small victory against the cynicism that had threatened to consume me. One Tuesday afternoon, I went to the mailbox at the end of my driveway. Tucked between a utility bill and a catalog for gardening supplies was a single hand-addressed envelope. It was cream-colored, elegant, and instantly familiar. The handwriting was Brenda's. My steps back to the house were slower than they had been on the way out. I placed the rest of the mail on the kitchen counter, but I held on to her letter. It felt heavier than its physical weight suggested. It was an entry from a ledger I had declared closed, an unaudited item from a past I was trying to file away. I took it into my office and sat at my desk, turning it over and over in my hands. There was no return address, but I recognized the postmark from a small town on the other side of the state. I wondered what it could possibly contain. An apology, a demand, another torrent of accusations. My first instinct, the instinct of the trustee, was to shred it unopened. It was an unauthorized communication regarding a closed account. It was irrelevant. But as I sat there, the letter in my hand, I realized the man holding it wasn't just a trustee. The father, the ghost I thought had vanished, was still there. He was weaker, wiser, and far more cautious, but he hadn't disappeared entirely. He was curious. He needed to know what was on the other side of that seal. The new ledger I was building was about giving people a chance, about investing in the potential for something better. To ignore this letter felt like a betrayal of my own new principles. It was a risk, an uncalculated one. But perhaps I thought some entries in life can't be audited before they are accepted. They simply have to be read. I took a final steadying breath and slid the single-folded page from the envelope. The letter wasn't long. It was just a few paragraphs written in the familiar looping script I had once praised on her homework assignments. There were no excuses, no justifications. There was no blame cast, no anger directed at me. There was only a stark, painful accounting of her own failures. She wrote about the shame, the foolish pride, and the bottomless pit of envy that had driven her and Kyle. She wrote about losing everything, and in the process being forced to see herself for who she had truly become. It wasn't a plea for forgiveness, not directly. It ended with a simple, devastating line: "I don't know if I can ever earn back your respect, but I hope one day I can earn back my own." I read the letter twice. The words were a stark contrast to the hashtags and business jargon she had hidden behind for so long. For the first time in years, it felt like I was hearing from my daughter again, not a brand she was trying to build. The trustee in me noted that it offered no solutions, no repayment plan. But the father in me recognized the first painful step toward a different kind of balance sheet, a moral one. I folded the letter carefully and placed it in the top drawer of my desk. I didn't need to reply, not yet. Maybe not ever. Forgiveness wasn't a transaction that could be completed in a single day. Her journey back was hers, to walk alone. My journey was here in this office with the lives I could now choose to impact. The letter wasn't a liability to be dealt with, nor was it an asset to be cherished. It was simply an acknowledgement, a final entry that confirmed the account was indeed closed. A sense of profound peace settled over me, a quiet that was deeper than the absence of conflict. It was the peace of a balanced ledger, not of dollars and cents, but of principle and purpose. My wealth was no longer just a number. It was potential. It was a new oven for a baker, a first tool set for a mechanic, a chance for someone else's child to build a real dream on a solid foundation. I had lost a daughter, perhaps temporarily, perhaps forever. But I had found a new purpose for my legacy. In life, as in accounting, we are often forced to write off bad debts. It's a painful but necessary process to ensure the health of the entire enterprise. The greatest lesson is learning what to do with the capital that remains. It's not about recouping the loss, but about making a wiser, better investment next time. Thank you for experiencing this entire journey with us. Arthur's path from betrayal to peace is a powerful reminder of self-worth. If his story resonated with you or touched your heart, please show your support by liking this video. We invite you to share your impressions in the comments below. Your insights are what build this community. And finally, to ensure you don't miss our next story, please subscribe to the channel. We are grateful for your time and look forward to seeing you again soon.